Hey everyone, welcome to another episode from Pro Engineering. In this episode, I'm going to go over something that a lot of people ask me about, and that is what electronics to put into a vintage car. There's a lot of answers. There's no, real straightforward set of electronics that you could actually put in an older vehicle. There's only some suggestions and things that I would recommend. And a lot of these things are going to depend on how often you're going to run the car, what the application is, what kind of car it is, and really what your overall intent with the vehicle is. So for this one here, we're going to start with this Tamiya Falcon. This I think is a good example because this is a car that is rather delicate, and because this car has not been re-released, a lot of its components are quite difficult to find. This particular one you saw in an earlier video that had the new front suspension from Pro, so this actually does have a 3D printed front suspension system, and that was one of the issues with the car, was that the plastics were quite hard and brittle, and oftentimes you would find these cars in very, very poor condition because you'd have really all of the front end destroyed, as well as issues with the chassis. Now, the good thing is the chassis is available on the Stadium Blitzer. That is an option if you do want to get your Falcon all put back together. But again, overall, this is really not the kind of car that you're going to start bashing. So the electronics that you can put in this car really don't need to be very high end. This can be a very simple car, and let's go ahead and kind of start with some of the basics here. Step one, we need to make sure that the car has been all cleaned out just to ensure that nothing's gumming it up. This is a used car, so we should probably pop open the transmission, make sure that it's not all full of crud. And my number one recommendation for this, whether or not you're going to use it once and then put it on the shelf, or if you're going to use it every single day, throw away those garbage bushings and put in some bearings. Modern bearings are very, very inexpensive. You can get a set for this entire car for about $3. The first thing I want to do is crack open this trans. As I'm not focusing on a build for the Falcon, I'm just kind of talking about what to do with getting an older vehicle back on the road. I'm not going to go into very much detail on how to do things to the Falcon. I'm going to focus on what we're going to do to a vintage RC car to get it operational. I've pulled the trans apart, and you can see here that this counter gear isn't doing so hot. So this is going to have to go, and I'm going to throw in this replacement here. Please note that if I didn't have a replacement, it would be possible to kind of shave this thing down a little bit and very carefully clean out the teeth. But as I do have a better gear, I'm going to go down that path. Still, this may have not been a total loss if one was not easily sourced. As with this gear over there, I'm going to pull out these bushings and replace them all with ball bearings. The reason why I'm so adamantly against bushings is because they are a massive, massive area where you're going to find a lot of friction, a lot of power loss, and you're also going to drain the battery significantly quicker. I used to have a Grasshopper that had bushings, and I lent it to a friend of mine and went to the track, and I had my Hornet, which had ball bearings. Both of them had stock motors. The Grasshopper lasted 75% as long as the Hornet did, so it lost a quarter of its runtime. Therefore, I simply will not tolerate dealing with them any longer. So this one's got a little bit of goop in here. Oh, there's also, look at that, it fell out. Another reason why you want to clean these out. The grub screw just came out of this thing. Usually I hesitate cleaning out gearboxes with any kind of liquid because oftentimes this grease is very difficult to remove, and some chemicals can be far too harsh on the plastics, especially older ones. So I find that just giving it a little bit of a scrub down and wipe away any of the bulk is going to be good enough. So we'll put this ball bearing right there, and we can reassemble this guy. So the gearbox now has all of its ball bearings, so we can go ahead and slide it back together. You can see it all very happily here, spinning around quite freely. I'm going to go ahead and put the screws back in this case, but that will wrap up the transmission. The gearbox has been completely assembled. The Falcon has this neat little cage, so that's been put on as well. But since we're here with the gearbox, I want to put a motor on this car. This leads me to quite a topic of conversation. What motor do I put in my vintage car? This, I think, is where we're going to start to argue. I'll pull out my motor drawer here. Now, please understand that what I'm about to say is my opinion and only my opinion. I'm sure many of you will have ideas that differ from me, and that's fine. That is what opinions are for. For an older car like this one here, my number one recommendation would be a stock silver can. In terms of the Falcon, or cars that usually tend to be a little more brittle or hard to get parts for, this is about all you want to put in the car. Unless you're a quite skilled driver, these standard silver can motors are going to really save the car's life in terms of any potential large jump you may decide to launch it off of, or a curb that you may inadvertently hit. Oftentimes the question of, can I put a brushless in my blank, comes up. And if it's a car like a Hornet or a vintage RC10 or something like that, then most likely it's going to be okay, because those transmissions are going to be a little bit more capable of withstanding those motors. More importantly, their chassis are either going to be easier to get parts for or going to be more robust. A Hornet will disintegrate if you put a ridiculously fast brushless motor in the car and plow it into a wall. But who cares? A new chassis is $7. When it comes to a more vintage car, or I should say, when it comes to a more rare car like the Falcon to get parts for, or more complex cars like the Hot Shot, this can be quite difficult to deal with. So in terms of this car, I do want to put a stock motor in it. And as you can see, I've got a lot of vintage stock motors. So I think I want to just throw something in this car that's stock and old school. So as I'm kind of rummaging in here, I'm going to see if anything kind of jumps out at me. Kind of this Speedworks here seems to be looking good. I don't know anything about this motor, but anyway, I remember these Speedworks motors when they were brand new, and I think this would be a nice addition to the car. And this Speedworks, this modified? It's modified, isn't it? Okay, never mind. This is a modified motor. I do not want to put that in the car. Well, folks, after some rummaging, I've decided to go with this Midnight. I like these Trinity Midnight motors. They're pretty darn good. And I do plan on running this Falcon at the racetrack when I get it all operational. So I think this is going to be the path I want to go. And just double checking, yeah, this is in fact a stock motor. I thought it was, but I've made that mistake in the past. Because I'm dealing with kind of an older motor, this one came in a used car, so I don't know what the condition of this motor is. I'm going to check a few things. I want to check the brushes. I want to lubricate the bushings, and then I want to put some comm drops in here. So I'm going to pull off the springs. I've often found in some of these older motors, the springs look to be good, and then I take them off and they break. So I think this is probably a good idea, because you don't want to start dealing with motor issues the minute you get the car moving. So these brushes look a little bit gooey. Let's clean these up. Some of these gummed up brushes, maybe they put a lot of comm drops in here or something. If these are really gummed up, you want to make sure you take a Q-tip in there and clean them, because this could prevent the brushes from sliding back and forth in the slot like they're supposed to, and ultimately give you a lot of problems with the car kind of cutting in and out if the brush gets stuck. I'm going to take a Q-tip and clean out these bores. So I'm going to take some alcohol and just put it on the end of this Q-tip. Okay, there we go. And just put it in here. And you want to make sure that you don't get any of the Q-tip permanently lodged in here. That would be unfortunate. So kind of give it a little bit. See all the crud that's coming out of there. Clean one in there. That's pretty good. And that's a lot better. Clean off this case a little bit. The motor looks to be in really, really good shape, so that's nice. And I think we can clean off these brushes just a tad more. Now I'm going to put some comm drops in here, and then I want to put some oil on the bushings to just lubricate those. I use this absolutely ancient comm drop here. It's probably from 1996. We'll just kind of put a little dab here and drip it right on the commutator. I really should use the little needle that it came with, but it's clogged. So what I'm going to do is, after I do this, wipe the case off, because it's just got a little drip on it right there. And then once again, just kind of clean these out a little bit. There we go. And we can also put little drops of this on the actual brushes. Okay, cool. So the brushes have comm drops on them now. And we can now slot them into place. They're so much looser now. Before they were quite gummy. All right, those are in. We can put our springs back on. So springs are in. We'll use a little drop of Trinity bushing oil over here. Probably the same vintage as those comm drops. Okay. And I should have shown you earlier, but I did clean these out with a X-Acto knife, and then I did spray it down earlier with some motor cleaner, which I do very lightly because I don't want to damage any of the adhesives on this thing because I think it looks quite nice. So I didn't put very much in here, but I did spray out these bushing areas here. Not something that you want to do indoors. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just take a 7.2 volt battery, hook the leads up, and see how this thing runs. Okay, we're going to hook this lead up on this side, and we'll just tap the positive. Motor sounds quite happy. Let's install it. I'm going to put the stock pinion on this car, and the manual happens to call out an 18 tooth, so that is what I'm going to use. One thing I want to make note of is that I am not installing that fiberglass plate that normally goes right here on Tamiya kits, and that is a mistake. I am simply out of them and cannot recall where I put my last 3 or 4 of them. So I'm just going to put this in right now because I need to test this car out. But please note that the little disc that goes over here between the transmission and the motor isolates the motor's heat source from the transmission. Without that, you are going to cause irreversible damage to the transmission case in the event that the motor gets excessively hot. So again, I want to mention you must use that isolator disc that goes between the motor and the transmission case in the event you're working on a car that has a plastic transmission housing. If you've got a car like an RC10 that's got an aluminum plate there, you don't want to do that because the aluminum plate is part of the heat sink. Put this in here, and it looks about right. So I've got the motor being installed here. And on some of these older Tamiyas, you do have multiple motor positions. So just make sure that you do select the correct one. This 18 tooth pinion will fit in both positions. Unfortunately, in one of them, it binds up. And although the motor appears to be sitting properly, it will not turn at all. So do make sure that you get it in the correct placement. You should see a little bit of play between the spur, or in this case the counter, and the pinion. So this transmission's buttoned up, and again I apologize, I don't have that motor cover, which I'm going to design because it turns out that they're quite hard to find, or you have to buy an entire tree, so I'm going to make my own. And I don't have that plate in here, which I'm also going to 3D print. I'm beginning to install the rear end, and we might as well address the axles at this point here. Yet another area where we are going to want to install ball bearings. So we've got some bushings taken out, and we've got these new bearings here. And we will install these, put these right back together. So I've got the axles with bearings now, and we'll put in these dog bones. These particular dog bones are interesting because they're plastic with a metal pin, and the cups that they go into are plastic as well. I do not recommend lubricating these, as all that's going to do is draw in grime and dirt and make the car have quite a bit more problems than if they're non-lubricated. Also, although I do plan on driving this car quite a lot, it will not be the quite a lot that the 10-year-old in me would have driven it. Really hope I can do this without disassembling something, and we'll just give it a go. I might be failing at this. Wow, that worked. Okay. Laziness win. Alright, so I'll reattach the transmission and go on from here. You will also want to inspect the shock absorbers. In the case of this particular car, and as far as every Tamiya I've ever purchased used, the shock throw was perfect. So I'm not going to bother rebuilding these. I'll show you on a different set.